I just want to come right out and say that I'm a big Pokemon fan, always have been. Since the early games, I've loved the franchise, and have played nearly all of the games. But even I must admit that the typical format was getting a bit stale, so when the new Pokemon Legends Arceus was released to critical acclaim, I was very excited to see the next step for the series to take. This game offered an expansive open-world style with tons of Pokemon to find and a much more streamlined catching system to make sure that the game doesn't grind to a halt constantly. It seemed like a big new step for Pokemon, and I was certainly interested. But I was still very skeptical. Sword and Shield was just okay, and the DLC was absolutely horrible, so I was not gonna hold my breath for this game. But I took a chance on this game, and let's see if I regret doing so. As I said, the open areas of Pokemon Legends Arceus are incredibly refreshing, especially for series veterans such as myself, and while it's certainly impressive upon a first look, we'll get into if it's worthy of being an open world later on, as I must do with all games in the genre. For now, I want to talk about visuals. The game has been largely maligned, even by those who love it, for its visuals, and I can totally see why. While the game does sometimes look beautiful and the Pokemon designs are, as always, a phenomenal achievement, the typical visuals here are incredibly underwhelming. And while I'm not some visual snob, the game could easily have looked far better. Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 2, and especially Breath of the Wild all look incredible, and those came out 5 years ago on the same console. You'd think that by now developers would be able to make games that look even better, but in this case, they just didn't. Now, I must make it clear that the developers at Game Freak are not at fault for anything here. It's the horrible management of the Pokemon Company, but I'm attacking the game, not the people who made it. The game flat out does not look appealing at all most of the time, and while that's not too big of a deal, it could at least run properly as a trade-off. I experienced very few frame drops in Breath of the Wild or Odyssey, and as I previously said, those both look way better to begin with, so they managed to look great and run great, but Pokemon does neither of these, which is inexcusable. You're telling me that with these Wii-level visuals, you can't even avoid insane pop-in and frame rate drops? It's the worst of both worlds visually, which is incredibly disappointing. This could have been a great technical showcase and step forward for the series, and while I wouldn't be too mad if it at least performed well, it doesn't. So I'm pretty annoyed. The character models are incredibly basic, the environments too, and there are weird visual issues like this white line around your character that appears in caverns. It makes no sense why it's there, and it just looks ugly and odd. But hey, I don't care nearly as much about that as I do gameplay. So how's the gameplay? Exceptional! Not only do you have the basic yet addictive combat of Pokemon, you also have some incredibly fun and engaging traversal with Pokemon that you can use to ride around on land, air, sea, and even one that you use to climb with, as well as far better catching. The goal of the game is to complete the Pokédex, and in this game that actually feels possible and like it would be fun. You will actually see the Pokemon out in the wild. You'll have to use a real, cohesive strategy to get them, and use an arsenal of berries and balls to finally obtain some of the trickier ones. It's really fun to stumble upon new Pokemon, and since catching them is so strategic yet instantaneous, it really feels like a perfect evolution of the typical formula. Exploring around the massive maps would be incredibly boring without the addition of these Pokemon, and seeing their models in real time is yet another great reminder of how much effort is put into making these unique, creative characters. Combat is still turn-based, but we now have the addition of an action order, with agile and strong type moves to add a stellar strategy to your attacks as well. It's quite simple, but combining this with tight matchups is so satisfying and makes for the most interesting Pokemon combat experience ever. The difficulty is also the best it's been since Heart Gold, with a system that allows you to wipe out foes very quickly, but also lets them take you down quickly too. This means that battles are way quicker and more intense, and you might actually feel threatened by certain opponents. Even though the final boss is way too easy, the other bosses are yet another example of improved difficulty. which feels very balanced. And even for someone who didn't mind the easy difficulty of the other games in the series, this is a notable and helpful change. But enough about that. Now it's time to ask the ultimate question. Is Pokemon Legends Arceus a good open world experience? I cannot believe I'm honestly saying this, but yes. To me, these are the games I think of when you talk about good games. And of those, only a small number are open world. And yet it's my favorite genre out there. How is that possible? Well, I'm perfectly willing to admit that most open world games are either bad or don't even need to be part of the genre, but the things that the genre can achieve are what push it to being my favorite. Horizon's intense enemies and amazing locales, Zelda's insane amounts of freedom, and Spider-Man's traversal are the methods by which open world design has been perfected, and I'm happy to group this game in with Spider-Man. The movement of Pokemon Legends Arceus is, in my opinion, its crowning achievement. While the catching and fighting gameplay is the best it's been in years, the way you move around the world is a whole nother level. You can gallop through the ground on a Wyrdeer, majestically fly through the air with a Braviary, and even race through the water and climb up high cliffs. And yet it can all be chained together so seamlessly. You can be on a Braviary in the air, dive down and get onto your Basculegion in the water, double jump into a cliff and climb up it, and then rush around the mountaintop in one motion, which is so satisfying and makes the game fun to explore beyond just the Pokemon. Once you've seen all the Pokemon on the map, this is what will keep you engaged, and it certainly does a great job. It also helps that the worlds are split up into many different areas rather than one big map. This means that things feel a bit more manageable and straightforward. Since this game obviously can't achieve the wild and beautiful maps of Horizon and Zelda, it can work with a few different, smaller worlds. But this is also where one of my other problems with the game comes in. Yes, I love going around this world and battling Pokemon, catching them, etc. The gameplay is overall fantastic, and the best part of the game, but there are a few speed bumps. Normally the game lets you explore an area and do some slightly dull story tasks, get some new, fun abilities, and then move on and explore a new place. It's simple, yet effective, but in the later parts of the game, you're forced to get your star rank up to continue the game, which takes place throughout, but later on it requires an absurd amount of experience to level up, which is truly problematic for the pacing and overall fun. The game lets you blaze through and have a total blast until it decides you need to grind 50 more Bidoofs to keep the story going. It's a regressive and annoying form of design that plagues many RPGs, but thankfully it doesn't last too long. I hated the 2 hours I had to spend catching the same Pokemon over and over to level up, but that's only a small fraction of the total time I spent playing. What was the rest of the time doing? Well, playing through the phenomenal world and combat, yes, but also sitting through some of the most boring and lifeless cutscenes ever. I know it's a dead horse at this point, but I do agree with the common consensus that this game's largest issue is story. I don't really care if this game has a good story or not, that's not what one should play a Pokemon game for, but if you want me to sit through this much dialogue, I expect to be at least entertained. No. This is the opposite of fun. It's so boring. There aren't really any themes, there's practically no humor, no really interesting twists or reveals, and the idea of exploring the ancient past is very intriguing at first, but really doesn't get that much time to shine at all. In comparison to Horizon, where the world is fleshed out beyond belief and the story is unpredictable yet beautiful and poignant, this is weak as hell, and once again, I wouldn't mind if there wasn't so much of it. I would play for 20 minutes just to have all the fun sucked out by having to sit through another 5 minutes of clicking through boxes until I could continue playing. There's just nothing here, and though there was one instance in which the story actually had an interesting message, that is buried under a mountain of nothingness. But thankfully, that is my only other major issue with the game. In the end, it does manage to be a fun open-world experience with lots of variety, have the best combat of the whole series, and bring the series forward. but it's majorly dragged down by periods of tedious grinding, a horrible story with no point in taking up all the time it does, and embarrassingly poor visuals that run as well as a sloth that took Dramamine. It's by no means a bad game, and I'd even call it a must-have for Switch owners due to the insane amount of content and fun to be had, but there are certainly huge, unmistakable flaws that pop out like a sore thumb. I think I'll give this game a 3.5 out of 5. I appreciate the effort put in here to modernize the franchise, I really do, but this needs a lot of work until I can really see it as a Game of the Year contender, and hopefully that will be achieved with Pokemon Violet and Scarlet.